Okay, so welcome everyone to chevaliersbooks online. We are LA's oldest independent bookstore, established in 1940. I am expecting a very fun evening tonight. If our little chat in the green room was a little taste, I'm sure we're going to do a lot of laughing. We have the always hilarious, always insightful Marla Jo Fisher for her new book, Frumpy Middle Aged Mom, pictured here. Marla Jo is in conversation with Mary Lea Carrol tonight. Mary Lea is the author of Saints Everywhere and Somehow Sane. She's also previously worked in travel, in theater, and in Hollywood, and also has previously taught children's creative writing and is a storyteller. You might catch her telling stories around LA for different events. Mary Lea is also a contributor to the book Hometown Pasadena, where she has been a lifelong resident. But tonight, Mary Lea's real job is to interrogate our main star, Marla Jo Fisher, for her new book. Marla Jo was previously an investigative reporter before she adopted her two children out of foster care at age 46. And now she juggles being a single mom and the mastermind behind the laugh out loud funny column you all probably know her from already, Frumpy Middle Aged Mom. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead, hand over the proverbial stage to our two lovely speakers tonight. Please give a silent but warm welcome to Marla Jo Fisher and Mary Lea Carrol. Ladies, please take it away.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Marla.
Hi.
So tonight, Marla and I are going to be talking about her new book that is just launching right now. And it is a compendium of many years of her column. And we met, Marla and I met very recently, like in the realm of several hours ago, actually, over FaceTime. But we share the same publisher, who put us in touch with each other. And she thought we would be good conversation partners. The book that I just have launched a day before Marla's is this one. And I have it from the publisher that her book on pre-order has been doing so well that if you're interested in getting it at Chevalier's, that you have to do it now, because the reprint, the second edition, will not be available until the new year. So you have to do it now, and they've got it on in stock. So early bird gets the worm, and it's the same with this one. So Marla Jo and I, we've texted back and forth quite a bit, just having fun with all of the coincidences that we share in life. And we'll get into all of that. But I guess the first question I have about this is, Marla, how did this book actually come to be? How did it get started?
Well, I've been writing my column for 12 years now. And I started writing it because I was so crazed at the idea of being an old lady and trying to raise these two little kids and not knowing what I was doing. So I started writing a blog, and then that blog turned into a newspaper column because I already worked for the Orange County Register at that time as a hard news reporter. And then I started writing this column, and I've been writing this column about being a frumpy middle-aged mom for the last 12 years. And then this past, like about a year ago, or actually, I'm wrong, it's only a few months ago, believe it or not, a friend of mine who's kind of a roving editor for the Register said to me, I was thinking about maybe doing a book about your columns. What do you think about that? And I'm like, okay, because at the time I was actually sick. I have cancer, and I was in chemotherapy. And so a lot of people were being really nice to me because they were afraid I might kick off at any time, you know. Now I'm much better, and I'm not going to be kicking off anytime soon. And they're not as nice to me as they were, but they're still nice to me, but they're not quite as nice to me as they were. But so everybody felt sorry for me. So maybe they thought that would be my parting shot, would be to write this book, you know. So, but unfortunately for them, you know, it's not going to be my parting shot. But it's too late to back out now because the book's already published. So what happened is, fortunately, is that my friend Samantha got in touch with Colleen Dunn, who runs Prospect Park Books, and she wanted to publish it. So it all happened really fast, literally within the space of a few months. And my friends, who are editors, because I work for a newspaper, right, edited the book for free. Can you believe that? That's just so insane. As I said, they thought I was on my deathbed, so they were trying to help me out here. But so Colleen was like, if you get the book to us by this date, then we can be done by November. And boom, it was done. And the whole thing is so amazing to me because I've dreamed of writing a book my whole life, and somehow it just came together in the space of a few months. And now I'm, hanging around to reap the benefits of that. So it's all been pretty fantastic, actually.
Well, I mean, there's really a fun humor throughout the whole thing, but actually, like your main thing, it seems like, is to let other moms, other women off the hook. Is that in terms of being excellent at everything, or what do you have to say about like that?
Well, the thing is that like a lot of us are very driven people who have high standards for ourselves, and we, really want to do everything right, especially if you were the kind of girl who was like a good girl, and strived, to always do everything the best way they possibly could, right? Yeah. But anyone who's been around kids know that doesn't really work, because everything seems to go wrong, and no matter what you do, everything just gets out of control. And I got these kids. What happened to me was I was a workaholic. I loved my job so much. I forgot to get married. And then one day, actually, I was just too cranky to get married, and actually one day I just woke up and I went like, oh crap, I forgot to have kids, and it was just like, and I was 43 years old, and I'm just like, I need to have kids. I didn't want to sit around and knit doilies for the rest of my life, So I started this process through the county to adopt foster children because my mom had been a foster child, right, in Hardscrabble, Texas. And so I wanted to adopt siblings and keep them together. So I put my hat in the ring to adopt these kids. And then for one reason or another, it just took way longer than I thought it was going to. And when I finally got them, I was 46 years old. I mean, my friends from college were already having grandkids, And here I am, like a 46-year-old woman chasing around these two little kids. I mean, how they talk about having me time, after the kids go to bed, right? Drinking your appletini and watching the adult shows. Well, after my kids went to bed, I freaking fell asleep. I couldn't wait, for them to go to bed so I could fall asleep because I was so tired because I was 46 years old and I worked all day, right? And then, but anyway, it was the best thing I ever did in my whole life. I love them so much. Yeah. It was, my kids are everything to me. So but I'm sorry, but it was so hard, and I just felt like I was doing everything wrong all the time. And then I heard this line from Roseanne Barr, back when she had two names, and she did a stand-up, and she would get up there when she was a housewife, and she would kind of snarl, and she would go like, if the kids are alive at 5 p.m., I've done my job. And I thought, that's my new slogan. If they're alive at 5 p.m., I've done my job. And so I started this whole career of just having low standards, right? Like, you don't have to do all these things the magazines and the shows and the newspapers tell you to do. You just have to keep them alive. And that was the way that I survived not having a nervous breakdown, was just by saying, just keep them alive. And so I started writing this blog that turned into my column, which was about how to have low standards and how to be a terrible mom. And here's all the ways in which I'm a terrible mom. And people responded to it, because everybody's afraid of being a terrible mom.
Yeah.
And of course, the less terrible you are, the more you're afraid that you're terrible.
That
because
was
the terrible
something that,
moms don't know.
Exactly. That was something that you said that actually resonates quite a bit. Like even the women that are like super together, it's like they have guilt almost worse than other people. Or what did you find about that? Like some of your readers shared with you over time?
Oh my gosh. Well, I had this one friend, Valerie, I told you the story earlier, and she was doing this very important work where she was exposing the amount of lead in Mexican candy, right?
Yeah.
And they even went down to Mexico and they set up clinics to register people's lead levels. And I mean, it was a very important story, and they were nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for it, right? And so Valerie's doing this incredibly important work. But meanwhile, she comes to me and she's like, I feel so guilty because I'm missing my daughter's graduation. Now, this would be a concern, right? If you were missing your child's graduation, until you consider this. It was her daughter's preschool graduation, that she was missing, right? But this is how we are, right? I mean, we feel so guilty about everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's the genius. To me, that seems like the genius in this book is that everyone can just sigh and be real, just sigh and like get over themselves a little bit.
Yeah. And I mean, the funny thing was that I've heard so much from readers. They're just like, thank you so much, because because they have all this, usually their guilt is secret, right? They don't tell anyone how guilty they feel because they don't want people to judge them. Right. But, I've already judged myself and found myself wanting, right? So they don't feel so bad about coming to me and saying like, oh yeah, I did that too.
Yeah.
Shh, don't tell anyone, So, but yeah, I get a lot of that response from people,
Oh my gosh. Well, now tell us a little bit about your kids and what it's like to write about your kids, and like, how do you draw a line, like, or in saying too much, but you want to say the good stuff, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, sometimes I get letters and emails from people who say like, how can you violate your children's privacy? And one thing that's always funny to me is that people say like, how can you tell people that your children are adopted? As if, okay, first of all, that's something they should be ashamed of. I don't think so, right? And second of all, it's like, do these people think that they don't know this? These people think that they're unaware that they're adopted, I mean, they were, my daughter, who I call Curly Girl in my column, right? She's 21 now, and she was 3 years old when I adopted her. And my son, who I call Cheetah Boy in my column, he was 5 years old when I adopted them. So, they're perfectly aware that they're adopted, right? And they know their birth family, but it's just a tricky line to draw, and I made this rule up for myself in my head, which was that I would not write anything about them that if they later ran for president, the opposition researchers would not be able to find and use as dirt against them, And it's now becoming obvious that there's not much chance my children will ever run for president, but it's been a good kind of line, here's the line. So like, if they screw up their homework, I'll write about that. You know what they used to do? Oh my gosh. They had to wear uniforms to school, right? And we would fight literally every single morning. Was a monster fight about whether they were going to wear their uniforms or not, right? So you know what they would do? I didn't discover this right away. They would leave the house, go around to the side yard, discard their uniforms, throw them on the bushes, and then put on their other clothes. And I didn't realize this for the longest time, Yeah. And so, I mean, that's, they were just iconoclastic children. I mean, they were just who they were, and there was nothing I could really do about it. And they are to this day, And sometimes, people will tell me it kind of makes me laugh, because a lot of people will say like, oh, you're such a good mother. But I swear I'm really not a good mother, because you do understand that I am crafting these stories, And so there are serious things that happened in our family, I mean, we had serious issues, and I didn't write about them because I don't feel like it's my place to write about my children without their permission. Mm-hmm. And kind of hurts me a little because I would like to, because there's so many parents out there who feel
could
alone.
benefit, who could probably benefit from your experiences and your perspective.
Yeah, and like when these things were happening to me, I felt very alone, because you don't want people to judge you, and you don't want them to judge your children. So you don't talk about it. You just keep it to yourself, right? And that's a shame. I would like to write about this and say, don't be ashamed of this. And if it was just me, I would, because every time I screw up, I write about it, but I don't feel like I can, because that's their story to tell, not mine.
What do you think, how what your kids, what do they think of you writing about them? Is it fun for them, or are they, how do they?
They could not care less. If you think that young people read the newspaper, like, good luck to you, right? Because I'm sorry, boss. Everybody should read the newspaper all the time, and thank you, all you newspaper subscribers, because you paid my salary for 25 years. But the reality is that, they're more interested. If it was on Twitter, then they would be terribly interested. If it was on Instagram, they would be even more interested. But it doesn't really occur. I honestly don't think it occurs to them that anyone reads the newspaper. It's like, it's so funny, because people will react to them sometimes, and they'll kind of be like, somebody actually read that, Yeah. Like, my son was in I think a 4th or 5th grade Spanish class, and his Spanish teacher held up a newspaper article, right, about going to Mexico's Copper Canyon. And he said, look at this, you all should go there. And he showed the pictures, and my son said, my mom wrote that, and the teacher said, your mom didn't write this. And he's like, look, that's me in the picture right there, and so it was just kind of funny, because up until that moment, he had no interest in what I wrote, even when he was on the doggone front page. I mean, when there was a picture of them on the front page, they didn't care, because, the only time they were ever interested in anything about me was when I interviewed the lady who does the voice for Siri. They were very interested by that.
Well, you were also saying that you travel a lot, right? And that you've taken them all over the place, and that that sometimes you felt like they didn't appreciate that at all. But when they had their friends over, and their friends would see the photos on the wall, like, oh, you've been there, or you've been there. What was their, tell about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I guess they just kind of thought that everybody had, like, wanderlust, like I do, and so I guess it didn't really occur to them that everybody doesn't get dragged around the world like they did, right? And it wasn't really until they didn't even think about it or appreciate it until their friends would look at the pictures and go like, wow, you went to Egypt, wow, you went to Italy, all these different places. And then looking at it through their friends' eyes, then they could say, oh, I guess that was cool,
Yeah.
I remember the only place they ever really wanted to go was Cuba. When I said Cuba, they're like, yeah. And again, it was because all their friends thought it would be cool to go to Cuba.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Well, I guess it goes without saying that parenthood is a thankless job, but the rewards are great though. So speak a little bit about what the rewards are for you.
Oh my gosh. I just can't, I'm not even sure I can completely put it into words, because people will say, they will treat me, sometimes people will talk to me like, oh, your children were so lucky to get you, your motherless children were so lucky to get you, and you're so somehow altruistic that you adopted these children, right? But the reality is, well, first of all, there was people fighting over these kids, so a lot of people wanted these kids, but also I got so much more, I got as much, if not more, than they did, because being a mom has changed me in so many ways. And I have a friend who raised 2 boys, and then later she also adopted through foster care. And, she used to say to me, kids keep you young. And they really do. I mean, I didn't even know who SpongeBob SquarePants was when I got these kids. You know what I mean? Now I'm forced to listen to their fairly kind of awful music, but so at least I know who Kanye West and Drake are, I mean, and I'm in touch with popular culture, right? I know what Snapchat is. I know what TikTok is. My friends who are my age, who chose not to have children or were unable to have children, they are getting kind of prissy, It's just like one of them came over one time and she was just kind of like, can you make your kids be quiet? And I was kind of like, no, not really, but maybe we should try to get together, in other circumstances when kids aren't around, because unless I had duct tape, I really couldn't make my kids be quiet,
Oh my gosh. I know this very wise woman, and she said raising kids is like pushing a big rock up a hill, and then it gets to the top and it rolls away. And so the effort is getting to the top of the hill. And do you have any comment on something on that? On that?
Actually, when my kids were little, I had a friend who used to say that raising kids was like being nibbled to death by ducks. And I really thought that was so true. It's like, because when you've been a single person and you've lived a solitary life, maybe except for a roommate or 2, right? And then all of a sudden you have these 2 little gigantic bundles of energy descend on you, and everything just turns into instant chaos, and it's such a learning experience. I mean, I had never been a morning person, but I had to learn how to get up in the morning just so I could have a few minutes to myself before, the wrecking crew started. It was just like, right,
Were you able, Marla, to use your humor before you had kids and you were writing the blog and so forth? Were your columns or were you able to inject your humor into that, or was that a serious Marla? In those
that
years?
was a much more serious Marla. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm funny. I mean, people tell me I'm funny, but yeah, I mean, because I was writing hard news,
Yeah.
I mean, I was writing about embezzlements and people being indicted and, people stealing money from charities and, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it was more grim stuff, I mean, it was serious, intense stuff that people needed to know, but it wasn't the most cheerful topic ever, right? But now, I write a lot more nowadays. I just write a lot more about me because the kids provide less entertainment than they did before,
Right.
My son is a massage therapist and my daughter is a barista at Starbucks, and they do provide entertainment, but now I try to find entertainment in other things as well.
Yeah. Well, tell us more about your travel. And so when you had the kids, starting at a young age, where are some of the countries, or where are some, and then you said to me earlier that you actually had a book, 1 or 2 books that dealt with travel before the travel on the Cheapo travel.
Oh, I was writing a column called Cheapo Travel.
Okay.
And it actually ran in a lot of papers around the country because it was picked up by the AP Wire. And so in that column, because I always traveled cheaply my whole life, and I'm just a severe skinflint, and so I would spend an infinite amount of time just looking for the cheapest way to do anything. I'll give you an example. Okay, yesterday I stumbled across this airfare from LAX to Costa Rica for like $98 round trip. Right? I mean, like, what the hell? That was I've been to Costa Rica twice. We loved it, right? And it was $98. So you have to go to Costa Rica for $98. How can you not go to Costa Rica for $98, right?
Yeah.
And even though it was August, and oh my gosh, right? So hot. But so I spent literally 2 hours of my life marshaling the crew and figuring out if we were going to go to Costa Rica for $98 in August, Ultimately, we decided that we already had plans for August. And by the time I finally got back online, of course, the cheapo airfares were gone, which is the first lesson, right? But that's my hobby, and that's what I do for fun. But the thing I learned about the kids was, when I first had the kids, people would be like, oh, are you taking the kids? Well, I had to take the kids on the trips because I couldn't bear to not be with them, right? Bear to be without them. So they didn't really want to go, but they just had to go because I was going, And so we went. But what I learned was that mornings are for mommy and afternoons are for the kids. So in the morning, we had to go to a museum, and yes, it might be horrible torture for them. And in the afternoon, they got to do something fun like swim or ride camels or, do something that they wanted to do, right? Yeah. So to this day, they hate museums, by the way, but
yeah. I remember the first time I brought my daughter to a museum. I thought she was ready. She's like 6 or something. This was the Norton Simon. She's my most creative daughter. And it was the Norton Simon here in Pasadena. And I built it up. And we're getting there, and she doesn't even go over the threshold. And she's 6 years old, and she looks around, just from the doorway, and she says, this looks like the most boring place I ever saw. And I said, oh, okay, let's go home. Let's go home.
Right? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to tell you about, I love the Norton Simon too, by the way. But I got to tell you about my experience with the kids at the art museum. Okay. First of all, we went to the Latin American Art Museum in Long Beach, okay? Yes. And so I take the kids in there. They're little, right? They're little. And their normal personality is like, we're wild children, And so I take them in there, and they almost give me a heart attack because they want to touch every painting, right? And I have to be like, no, you can't touch, right? And the guards almost, killed us. And so then finally, all I could think of was like, we have to get out of here. We just have to get out. So I tell the kids, come on, we're going to go. We got to go. We've been there like 7 minutes, and they got down on their hands and knees and decided to be kitty cats. So they're crawling around on their hands and knees, meowing, right? Meow, meow, meow. And I'm like, get up, get up, get up. And this is actually a chapter in my book where I talk about, using the phrase, they're not my children, which is a very important phrase to learn, like, officer, they're not mine. I don't know whose children those are, but they're definitely not my children, right? So I just kept hissing at them to get up, and they wouldn't get up, And so I just turned around and started walking toward the exit, and I just kept saying to myself, they're not my children. They're not my children. They're not my children, right? And then we get outside, and the kitties followed me, right, and got in the car, So yeah, that was one of the art museum experiences that I had.
That redefines herding cats, doesn't it?
Oh my God, yeah, seriously. And then there was the time when, so I took them to the LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum, right? And, if you go in there, you can ask them for these cards that are supposed to be fun for the kids, because then they have scavenger hunts where they go through and they find the pictures on the cards, right? Right. Okay, so I thought that'll be good for them, right? That'll be an interactive experience. So I give my son the card. He was probably 8 years old, maybe, right? So I give him the card. It's a David Hockney painting, okay? And I give him the card, and I'm like, okay, go find this painting, right? So he finds the right gallery, and he goes up and he finds the painting, right? And he's like huffing and puffing because he's been running, like, he's like, there it is, I found it. And I'm like, good job, right? And then he turns around and he starts walking for the exit. And I said, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I found the painting. Can't we go now? I'm like, no.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I just learned not to take them to museums, you know. Why bother, you know?
Well, Marla, what would be some advice you have for just people in general, in terms of, I mean, by the age that you are now and everything you've been through for the last 20 plus years, if somebody were to ask you, like, what's important in life, like how do you get through a day with a sense of staying intact, not going crazy? Like, what can you say to somebody like that? That's something that you've learned through all of this experience.
Well, you know, I talk to groups a lot of times, and one thing that I say is that you have to do things that scare you, and you have to keep doing things that scare you, because otherwise you just turn into one of those shriveled up little people that just sits on the porch and can't do anything, you know. It's like I try to do things that scare me all the time, because by doing that you're continuing to push out, you know. As you get older you tend to shrink in, you know, but by doing new things, the things that you don't know, you're pushing out, you know, you're pushing yourself out into the world. And what happens is, I think, the older you get, the more you discover that the world can be a scary and dangerous place and bad things can happen, right? You know, it's like probably not a good idea to drive 90 miles an hour in the freeway. It's probably not a good idea to do all these different things. But what happens is, when we learn that the world can be a bad place, we start becoming afraid. And when you become afraid, your world starts shrinking so dramatically. And so I personally, and when I talk to groups, I bring this up, you know, I personally push myself to try to do things that scare me. I'll give you an example. I've never been in a kayak. I've always been scared of kayaks. I'm not like an outdoorsy kind of person, right? And I mean, I love nature. I love going into nature, but there's certain things that I have learned, to my chagrin, will always be a big disaster. And, you know, and personal watercraft is one of them, right? So, but my brother loves to do that. And so he's bugged me for years and years and years to go kayaking with him, right? So finally we were on the Russian River a few years ago camping, and he's like, okay, you're going to go canoeing with me? And I'm like, no, I'm not going. And he kept saying, like, what day are we going canoeing? And I'm like, we're not going canoeing, you know, like, you are a little hard of hearing, you know. And one thing led to another. And finally, eventually, I ended up getting into a kayak next to him on the Russian River, you know, and kayaked for, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes, something like that. And you know, that was a personal triumph for me, because I'd always been so afraid of it for so many years, you know. And of course, when you do those things, you often find there's really nothing to be afraid of. You know, I'm sure you found that too in your life, right? And you continue to conquer your fears, you just add to the joy in your life, and you add to your experiences. And so that's one of the number one things I say to people. And they did a study at Chapman University about happiness and depression. And what they found was that if people varied even one little thing that they did, then they were happier. Like, for example, take a different route to work, or eat in a different restaurant that you don't eat at. But something as simple as that, just getting outside your normal comfort zone, actually made people happier.
Yeah.
And I believe that.
I think that makes great sense to me, and that ties in also for me with traveling. And you've traveled solo. And are there any tips that you would offer to women to encourage people to, like, break those little chains that they've got going? And what would you say to women of a certain age?
Yeah, the thing is that I don't like traveling by myself much. I have done it, but I'm not the kind of, I mean, like, I'm a very gregarious person, and never stop talking, as you can tell. And I want somebody who has to talk to me at the end of the day. I don't want to go sit in a bar and find somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
Right? I want somebody who's forced to talk to me because they're in the next bed, And so I usually can find someone to travel with me, right? But if you don't have anyone, but I often do hear from people, who don't have anyone to travel with, and they're like, we wish we could travel. But, there's groups for people who don't have a travel partners. Like, for example, I went to India with Intrepid Travel, and I would recommend them. It's a small group travel. And our group actually only had I think 6 or 7 people in it. And they offer special trips just for singles.
Yeah.
Right. And so everyone on the trip, you're not going to be coming into a clique or whatever. Everyone on the trip is also on their own. Right. Yeah. So it's a way of being on your own, but not being on your own, and also making new friends, and maybe finding someone to travel with in the future.
Yeah.
But I am lucky because I have a group, a posse that I call the usual suspects, and they're tried and true. And before anyone's allowed to join the usual suspects, I give them a test, right? I tell them certain scenarios, and I'm like, what would you do in this scenario, right? And if they say run screaming or, cry, I'm like, no, you're not really, the right person for this group, So, but we've had a lot of fun over there.
Of course, begs the question: what would be a scenario? What would be?
Okay, well, this actually happened, right? Okay, so we're in Thailand, and we're taking a sleeper train across Thailand on New Year's Eve, and we had to get up at 2 a.m. to stop at this one particular station in the middle of nowhere. And I'd arranged via email to have the hotel send a van to pick us up because we were going to spend the night there before we went on our journey the next day. And so we get to the station, and because it's now New Year's morning, the station is pitch dark and there's no one there. We get off the station in the dark in the middle of the night, and it's pouring down that tropical rain, and we're standing there, and there's 7 of us, right? And we're standing there going like, oh, and there's no taxis. Our van is not there. Like, no one is there, of course. And as you might imagine, none of us speak Thai, right? And we're just like, oh crap, now what, right? And so I'm walking around. I just walk around the station. It's very tiny, right? And I see this little guy who was obviously like a little guard, like a young guy, right? And so I just grabbed him by the shoulders and I just shook him, and I'm just like, you have to help us, right? And he spoke a little English, right? And so I told him, I'm like, we're stranded here and our hotel didn't pick us up and we don't know what to do, right? And he's like, okay, let me see what I can do, And so meanwhile, I go back to my group, and because they've all been vetted carefully, no one's freaking out, no one's crying, no one's blaming me, everyone's just kind of concerned, going like, okay, now what, right? And then the little guy comes back and he's like, oh, well, I have a friend who has a king cab pickup, and he will come and get you and take you to the hotel for $40. And we're like, okay, let's go, right? Yeah. So his friend comes with a king cab pickup and a tarp because it's still pouring rain, and he puts all the luggage under the tarp, and all 7 of us pile into his king cab pickup, and he takes us to the hotel, and everything had a happy ending, right?
Well, there you go.
Right,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Yep, that sounds like a scenario. That's yep.
Yeah.
Marla, would you treat us all to a tiny reading, like something that gives our visitors on our Zoom conversation a taste of what it's like? Is there just something piquant that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'm just going to do this reading, but I'm a really, really bad reader, so I won't read too much because then you definitely won't buy the book. But this is actually about, this is actually completely true. Okay, this is about my relationship with other people and their cell phones. Okay, so this is from a column, and it's in the book, right? It's like, please keep talking on your cell phone. Do not let my presence disturb you in the least. I want to know all the details of how your husband is a bad lover. I want to know why your cat is coughing up hairballs and how your foot is healing after surgery. And I live for the chance to sit next to you in a waiting room or at the next table at the restaurant. And I especially like standing behind you in the checkout line at Target while you talk with your phone in one hand and rummage in your purse for your wallet with the other, while the clerk stands there waiting for you to cough up $51.95. It might have occurred to some of the people standing in the line behind you that your phone call could have waited 5 minutes until you got outside, but not me. I was in delicious suspense to find out what happened to your sister after your sister lost her keys in the parking lot. Did she find them? Did the auto club come? Did she have to walk home? Anyway, this is true. When I'm sitting in a doctor's waiting room and someone sits next to me, starts in on a long chat, nice long chat, I will move next to her and lean closer so I can really hear what's going on. Sometimes I'll even comment on the discussion if I feel like I have something to add. I'm not making this up. I really do this. And you'd be surprised how startled and annoyed people get. Really? How rude, they'll say, and they'll glare at me when I make a remark about their call, as if I had just grabbed some private body part or something. I then smile and explain if they want to have a private conversation, they should take it outside. If they're talking in a public place, especially right next to me, then I feel it's appropriate for me to join right in. I admit I don't know too much about gynecological surgery, but that doesn't mean I don't have an opinion to share. This is American way, right? So yeah, it is completely true. I actually really do this. Yeah. And it does shut people up,
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that's you're doing a public service, actually.
I was sitting in a hot tub at the gym once, and this older man got in. And he was wearing, like a World War II veteran baseball cap, and he's sitting in the hot tub with his phone, and he starts talking to his son on the phone on speaker. He's on speaker in the hot tub at the gym.
Yeah.
So I joined in.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Do you mind?" And I'm like, "Do you mind taking it out?" So yeah.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think we might have a couple of questions, and I wonder, Teresa.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is time, everyone, to get into the Q&A portion of our evening. I've mentioned it before, but make sure if you do have any questions, drop them in the chat box and we'll get to it. I'm going to use my privilege as host to ask the first question. Sorry, everyone. But Marla Jo, towards the end of the book, you have this brief chapter about your health, and you write this. This made me laugh out loud. Where you went to the hospital, and the ER doctor tells you essentially that you have a tumor in your brain, and you reply saying, "I can't have a brain tumor." I explained very carefully, "I have spaghetti on the stove." And I'm just curious about how do you maintain your sense of humor during hard times, and how do I acquire that feature? Because I think after this year, I could use some of that. I think a lot of us could use some of that.
Right, don't you think? Yeah, I actually did say that for real, because it's like when somebody tells you I have a brain tumor, it's like they said that aliens landed and abducted you or something. I mean, it isn't something you ever think about, or that, I mean, for me, it certainly is nothing it ever occurred to me that I would ever have, right? And the funny thing about that is that I wrote that whole column just in a big gush. I mean, I came home, right? And all this stuff just kind of gushed out of me, my memories of, being in the ER and all this bizarre stuff that happened, And what the funny thing was that when I was in the hospital, because they did take the brain tumor out, right? So I was in the hospital for 9 days. And the interesting thing about that was I got so much reaction to that column, right? That I felt it was absolutely necessary that I write a comical aftermath, right? But, this is going to shock you, but, having your head cut open is not all that fun, right? So it was a little hard at first to find humorous things to write, but I felt that I had to find, it had to be funny, right? So I spent all my time when I wasn't sleeping from the morphine, like finding funny things that were happening. And I made a little note. I had a notebook and I started writing them down, right? But the interesting thing happened is that in the process of doing that, I cheered myself up. Like being forced to look for funny things, like made the whole experience funnier and more pleasant, And I think that it's just a habit. It's a habit of looking for humorous things in your life, because it's very easy to look for depressing things in your life because they're all around us all the time, right? But being a humor writer for all these years now, I tend to look for the funny in everything. And I think that you can just make that a habit of your mind, I can't really tell you how to do that. But, but if you can learn to do that, like what's funny, okay, how could you flip that, right? Okay, so maybe 2020 sucked, right? But what about 2021? Just if there's a flip side of everything, right? So I don't know. I don't even know if that answers your question.
I think it was a pretty good answer, but I'm going to make sure to get through all these questions. Oh my goodness. The first one we actually have is from a Kelly. She says that her daughter is the proud girlfriend of Cheetah Boy. And Kelly asks,
Hi, Kelly.
how do you raise a young man of such moral fortitude? She is forever grateful.
Oh, that's so sweet. I am no longer, I was raised Christian, ardently Christian. And when I got older, I fell away from my faith, right? But I actually took my kids to church when they were little because I wanted them to have the ethical training that I had, and just learn to be good people. And I also wanted them to learn the basic Christian myths so they could reject them later in life like I did. And so I honestly think that is, I think you just lead by example, don't you? I mean, you try to show your children that you're a good person, and you just try to reinforce that. Okay, we're going to do this thing because not to help the other person, but because it makes you feel good, right? It makes you feel good to help people. It makes you feel good to be a good person. So it's not really about doing something for someone else. It's really about doing something for yourself. And that's the way I try to raise my kids, and I think they've swallowed some of it.
We have a question from Colleen Bates, a little related. Colleen's asking, what's one thing you wish you would have known about raising kids that you did not know when they were little?
Never take them to expensive restaurants. Because the minute you take them to an expensive restaurant, first of all, they will order the most expensive thing on the menu, and then they won't eat it. And then they will tell you that they're not eating it because they aren't hungry. And then they will ask you for the $11 dessert, which they also won't eat because an expensive restaurant does not serve Twinkies. So, yeah.
This one's from Rebecca. She asks, Marla Jo, who is your favorite editor?
Oh, my favorite editor would be Rebecca Allen, who's probably asking that question because she's the one who edited this book. And Rebecca was my editor who encouraged me to become a columnist, and I think hired me as a columnist at the Orange County Register. And she's an awesome editor. And I presume that's you, Rebecca. And if it is, thank you. And I love you infinitely.
So we're waiting on some more questions. So make sure to drop that in the chat. Everyone, do not be shy. We will have your questions answered. So make sure to put them in there. I have another one, which is as your kids are growing up, are there parts of it as they're adults now that you find harder than when they were younger? Or is sort of everything just easy sailing right now?
Well, it's easier than it was, but I can tell you there's a big differentiation between being a parent of a small child, being a parent of a teenager and older, right? Like when they're small children, it's physically exhausting, right? Because you have to do everything for them. And especially if you're old like I was, I mean, sippy cups and the, like everything that is involved with taking care of a small child is just a physical grind, right? And, and you become accustomed to it, but you never stop being exhausted by it, right? I mean, mothers are donkeys, right? I mean, you have to bring everything with you every time you go anywhere. It's like, oh, I got to bring the backpack because they might need the sweater and they might need their cleats. And, I mean, it's just so exhausting, right? But what happens is that as they mature and they start moving away from you, then it becomes more mentally stressful, right? Because you're suddenly terrified because you can't watch them every single second, and you don't know what they're doing every single second, and you don't know who these people are that they're getting in the car with, and and you don't trust that they're going to make good decisions, and they're suddenly subject to all these forces that you no longer have the opportunity to control. And so that is extremely difficult and stressful. And I'm watching some of my friends go through that right now, and that might be harder than the physical effort of taking care of the little kids, because when you first lose that control, it's terrifying. And then there comes a certain point where now I'm no longer tell my children what to do. They, scoff at me when I try. Now I'm in the role of like advisor, like I give them advice. This morning I was lecturing my daughter about, the 401k that Starbucks is offering and why she needs to join the 401k, and she's just like, okay, Mom, I'll think about it, and I'm just like, there's nothing to think about. Just join it, So it could be very frustrating because they're adults. I mean, you can't do anything about the decisions they make, right? So at that point, all you can really do is hope that you raise them well enough to make the good decisions. And once in a while, if you're really lucky, you'll hear something come out of their mouth that like you gave them, and it's like, yeah, right, yeah. So, but the nice thing is that I don't have to be completely responsible for them anymore. I mean, like they're making their own decisions now. I'm not agonizing over whether they're going to get a C in calculus, because it's on them now. And that's a relief,
For sure. I wonder if that's how my mom feels, but I'll have to ask her. This is actually a question for the two of you. As a bookseller, I'm very curious about this, but what is it like having your book come out in the middle of a pandemic? Do you have any regrets about the timing, or are there any pros or silver linings from actually it coming out at this point?
Well, Mary Lea should answer that because she's had both, right? Before and after.
Yeah. One of the my blurbers for Somehow Saints called it a pocketbook of miracles for these times. And so there was debate about when to launch it for sure. And the publisher didn't want to launch it near the election because of all the distractions. But we thought, go ahead, because it's perfect for people's frame of mind, and it's uplifting and funny, and people would want this message. But what does that mean in terms of like getting it out and raising awareness and getting it into the larger culture? It means I have to work a lot harder and just do a lot of talking and trust that a good story and a good book is going to find its audience. But it's very different than what it was like last year when the first step of these two books came out. Yeah, but this with the second book, I already have people who enjoyed the first book have purchased the second book already. So that was something, a step that I didn't have to invent this time, or the publisher didn't have to invent it. So, I feel confident, but it's definitely a different world,
Well, it's a little bit weird because I don't know any different, okay? Because this is the first book I've ever had published, so I don't know the difference. Mine is a little bit different in that, I've had this column for a long time, so I have readers already, you know? So in fact, you should join my Facebook page, which is Frumpy Middle Aged Mom on Facebook. And we actually have a lot of fun on there. I take parenting advice from total strangers, which some people find weird, but you know, whatever works. And so, you know, it's an ongoing conversation with myself and my readers. And right now, I'm thinking that they're the primary audience for my books. Now, would I love the Today Show to cover me and like be all over the world? Yes, I would love that, but I don't know if that's going to happen. But what is funny is that, you know, I can't even have a book signing, right? Because like everything's shut down, you know? So it's like even trying to have a book signing, I'm just going to have people are like, we really want you to sign our book. So I'm going to have a series of guerrilla book signings where I'm just going to be like, okay, I'll be in this parking lot. I'll be in this parking lot from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And if you want your book signed, come over there, but hurry up. And if I'm not there, it's because I got busted, you know? So that's going to be like my book signing. If you want to have a book signing, then, you know, go on my Facebook page and you can find out where the book signing is, you know? So that's a little bit weird, you know? So, but, you know, but then I've always been a little bit of an outlaw. So who knows, maybe, you know, maybe that was meant to be, you know?
For sure. Don't tell anyone, but I might have to book one of these guerrilla book signings for the bookstore. So we're actually, oh my gosh, I have a whole list of questions for the two of you, but we are just about almost at the end of our hour. My last question for you, Marla Jo, is do you look forward to or have any interest in writing a column about being a frumpy grandma?
Oh yeah, I think that'll just be, you know, part of this. I don't really want to do it right now. You know what I'm saying? Like my kids are 23 and 21. I have no interest in being a grandma right now. But yeah, I think it'll just be, you know, part of the whole shtick as, you know, I evolve along. And then I don't know, people are asking me right now if I'm interested in writing a travel book. So, you know, I don't know, maybe that'll happen. But it's been such a wonderful journey writing this book. It just is, to me, it was just like a miracle that this book even happened. And it's even more of a miracle that anybody wants to read it, you know, so I couldn't be happier, honestly.
Got it. All right. Well, I want to thank the two of you for a really fun evening. Thank you for helping me and our guests escape from reality for an hour into your conversation. Before we say goodbye, I do want to mention again, if you would like to reserve a coveted copy of Frumpy Middle Aged Mom, you can go to our website, chevaliersbooks.com, and let us know. We could ship it to you or we could throw it at you from 6 feet away. Maybe we might even get a guerrilla signing in there. But before we say goodnight, Marla Jo or Mary Lea, do you have any last words for us and our guests?
Marla?
I know I should have thought of something, I know, but I really didn't.
Well, you know, you never know where all the Zoom attendants are from. And I just think it's the pandemic is a great opportunity for us to find the funny in what Marla was saying, and for us to find many different ways to be kind to each other and to keep our lovely world turning, really. And I've enjoyed, Marla, it's been a total kick being with you. And I know this is just step one on a long and fun relationship.
Oh, I feel the same way. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, you both are so sweet and so funny. We're gonna say goodbye now. Thank you everyone for joining us on this Thursday evening. I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks, Teresa. Bye, Marla. Okay.
Thank you, Teresa. Bye, Mary Lea.